Welcome to the Embodiment Matters podcast with me, Erin Giesemann Rabke, and my husband, Carl Rabke. Embodiment Matters is an ongoing, rich conversation about what it really means to be embodied and why and how embodiment matters so much in our daily lives and in our modern world. You can find out more about our wonderful guests, about our work. You can sign up for our newsletter and find out how to become a supporting member of our podcast online at embodimentmatters.com.
In this episode, we speak with Stephen Jenkinson. And this is the second conversation we've had with Stephen. And Stephen's a teacher, a writer, a farmer, an asker of really potent, challenging questions. He's written many books, and two that have had a great influence on us are Come of Age, the case for elderhood in a time of trouble, and Die Wise, a manifesto for sanity and soul. And Stephen, he's just a real profound voice of insight and looking at a lot of the things that are just kind of ignored in modern times. And we talk in this conversation a lot about the Nights of Grief and Mystery tour that he is on right now with the band throughout North America. And he speaks of how he and Gregory Hoskins, the band leader, were being faithful to something that had not yet appeared. He likened the gathering to, what was there before Greek theater and before a sense of an audience and a performer, and that it's much more like ceremony or ritual where everyone who shows up is an essential participant. And he talked about the Nights of Grief and Mystery being like 2.5 hours where you stop running from life. And it just sounds like an extraordinary gathering and a way of responding to the times we're in. And Stephen talks a little bit about, what it means to be claimed, to be a deeply claimed person who's claimed by what is being asked of a particular generation. And so we hope you enjoy the conversation. And if you're in a place where the tour is going through, pause the recording, go get a ticket, because it's really going to be a spectacular event. So you can find out more about the tour and Stephen's work and the Orphan Wisdom School at his website, orphanwisdom.com. So welcome, Stephen. We're so glad to be here with you today.
Thank you. It was a very kind offer. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
So I know you have embarked on the Nights of Grief and Mystery tour, and we're so psyched to have you come to Salt Lake with that. And I'd love to start out the conversation by maybe diving into each of these words, perhaps grief first and then into mystery. But why grief? What's the value in grief? Where are we lacking in grief?
Okay. Okay, good. So let's start soft beginning and then we'll work up to the heavy stuff. Well, let's see. I guess partly it's, I should say, as a phrase, it came to me maybe 3 years ago, as it seemed simply descriptive of what Gregory and I were trying to do in the very early days. And it wasn't as if, he was the mystery, I was the grief, or something that simple. It was more trying to be faithful to something that hadn't quite happened yet. That was, were we capable of doing something that we'd never seen, but we were somehow provoked by or prodded by or burdened by. We had a kind of sensibility that hadn't yet appeared in our lives as a art form or as a show or as a concert, or, not anything that we'd done, nor anything that we'd ever seen. That was probably how it started. It started as so many of these things do for me. It starts off as a kind of sense that all is not well, and I'm sure for some people listening that would seem to be an unnecessarily grim beginning to anything, but I don't hide or try to change the fact that I am a child of these times. Even though I just turned 65, it's a strange word to use to describe oneself, but I think you take the point. It's something, being faithful is not inevitable. Being faithful to what you were born into and what you were privileged and burdened to see and to live through and to not live through, or to see other people fall by the wayside, or deeper still during the course of the proceedings. All of this properly begins to write your marching orders for you. And whether or not you'll undertake the journey and pack your saddlebags accordingly, I guess that remains to be seen, and that's what your life is for. But I'm not sure that you really get to choose beyond yes or no, I'll do it or I won't. But the times, they're your assignment, and they're your load, yeah? And I've always characterized what I do very unpromisingly, I suppose, in this way. It's a 3-step process. First of all, I build a mountain. Every time I stand up in front of people, I'm building a mountain. And I choose the phrase deliberately. It's an awkward phrase because we would think mountains are naturally occurring and inevitable and they're before us. And so how do you possibly build a mountain? Well, of course, from a human-made point of view, you don't actually. What you do is you just assemble the lumpiest things you can find and see if you can approximate that shape on the horizon, you see. But of course, the horizon I'm talking about is our sense of what's going on or not, or what's not going on, or what's ceased or what's looming. Mm-hmm. I take all of that and I assemble it in the first, third or half of everything I do, by which I say that I'm trying to make a case for a sense of urgency that must claim us as a prerequisite to doing anything that matters. And it's not desperation, it's not depression, but it flirts with those things from time to time. But it is a sense, an implacable sense of, these are the times, this is when I was born, there's no plan B, it's not getting better, go. That's basically it. That's the mountain. I'm trying to make the case that it's much worse than our, quote, normal lives and our normal tolerances and our normal attention spans are willing to know about. That's the first thing. And the second thing is I find some kind of inexorable burden or a kind of 10-ton stone. That's the second phase of the event, me trying to establish a sense of got to that arises from having assembled the mountain, some sense of assignment or compulsion or obligation. And then the third part of the event is climb. That's it. And so the phrase Nights of Grief and Mystery kind of echoes that understanding that these are evenings that have to be assembled, not assumed. So why would I lead with grief? Well, first of all, from the point of view of saying it in your mouth, grief feels better to begin with in mystery in the title. Otherwise, it sounds like a law firm, maybe, if I put it and we can't have that. So then what about grief? I'm coming around finally to answering the question that you did ask here. Well, it's no surprise to many people listening that I've worked in the death trade, or I should say, for quite a long time. It's been a best part of a decade since I haven't. But in those days, I had the extraordinary encounter with the full range of human death and the full range of the human refusal to die, all at the same time. The full range of human complicity with the refusal to die, and the scant courage on the professional end or even on the family end to call into question the kind of by default way that people tended to die. And that fell to me. And I could not have done it, but I don't know what else I would have done had I not taken that on, you see. And so two things. First of all, I didn't see a lot of grief in the death trade. That might sound really strange to you, I don't know, but I saw a lot of measures taken to not grieve, to quote, deal with grief, right? To master grief, which is a hilarity. And if it wasn't so cruel, it would just be ludicrous. But because grief is a god, frankly, and you're not in charge. The question is, to what degree will you learn the ways of that particular deity and learn to speak its language when it's present, as one does with any deity, or I should say, as one should with the presence of any deity. It's learning, and then a heavy dose of negotiation while you're trying to figure out what you're going to do next. So you have to be both light on your feet, entirely engaged, properly understand yourself to be in the junior position, and then mysteriously recognize yourself as mandatory for all of that. So somewhere in there, grief amounts to an understanding, I think, that the charge of the age, the pulse that runs through our time is not fundamentally celebratory. Whatever's left of our sense of well-being and self-satisfaction, our sense of being a superior civilization and such and such and such. I mean, I'm not sure that any of it's left, but in certain quarters, politically especially, sadly, it is still there. And I guess that's going to have to be torn from our hands rather than us laying it down with some kind of moral subtlety about the whole thing. And a sense of necessity that if I could put it this way, this is going to sound a little, serious, but I think our time is past. It's passing to the past. The sense of lordship over creation and a sense that everything is there basically at our beck and call to satisfy our noodlings and our sense of self-importance and even to assure us that we are important. All of these things they're passing away, and shorthand you could say America's time is done, and I think that would not be an unfair characterization of it. It's not advocacy, it's description. There's something about the experiment that has, at this point, it's proven itself. The fact that not everyone's willing to recognize the proof is a separate dilemma and part and parcel of the way we do things here in North America. But for all of that, I mean, if the sentimental tone is not grief, then it's grievance. And I would much rather be a practitioner of grief because I see what grievance does. I see the self-importance that fuels the damn thing. And grief is actually an antidote to grievance, to the sense of being ripped off. And kids, of course, are in a horrendous way emerging onto the political and social and cultural landscape with a sense of grievance that's beyond the understanding of most older people. Mm-hmm. The sense of inheriting a world so blighted, so without possibility, so foreclosed upon already before they even get a chance to screw it up in their own way, kind of thing, that I think people my age and older are completely bewildered and not even willing really to consider that one of the inadvertent consequences of us, quote, doing our own thing is that our children or our grandchildren are born with the most brackish bitterness on the back of their tongue. And that's what we're hearing from them now. So, I mean, what else could it be but grief if you're willing to be deeply touched by your times? I mean, what else could it be? It's properly that, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then as far as the mystery goes, if that's what you're going to ask next, well, these things are mystifying. That is to say that you can explain them, but you can't explain them away. So you might have a functional understanding of the mechanics of how it's come to be as it is. But the sheer unlikelihood No, I'll say it differently. The willingness to recognize it could have gone a lot of other ways. We could have done, I mean, if you just think about the foundation of your country or mine, I'm speaking as a Canadian now, you know, our national experiments could have gone much differently had we just been candid with ourselves at the outset. If we had said to ourselves, we are an unshaven orphan lump. We don't know how to do most of what we came here for. We've already stolen from people who are here before us. It is not a noble beginning. And we imagined this to be a clean slate operation. That's why we kept calling it the New World for so long. And all of this has amounted to a way of life that is so, you know, blighted the countryside that it's frankly unspeakable. So that's mystifying, yeah, because it's not to say that anybody started off with a grim intent to rape and pillage the countryside. Well, some did, obviously some did. But I think overall the experiment was steeped in a kind of naive lunge towards anything but what we knew. And what we've come to discover over the last couple of 100 years is that running away from something is not the same thing as leaving it behind. Because your way of running away from something carries the thing you're running from, no matter what you try to do. And so the key is to stop running. And I suppose the mystery part of the Nights of Grief and Mystery is the willingness for 2.5 hours without intermission is to stop running.
So would you talk a little bit about what happens on these evenings? What, I'm sure it's different every time, but what's your intention and what might happen?
Our intention is to remember the words to the songs and the stories. That's one. Because, I mean, there's a lot of travel and there's a lot of time in between. And as my countryman Leonard Cohen so gorgeously observed, he said, they do not pay you to sing no matter what they think. They're paying you to travel. See, that's what they have to pay you to do, because these days, especially the cost, I mean, the emotional and psychic cost of traveling and going through the insecurity at the airports and on and on and on it borders on the unspeakable, frankly. And it's not a sustainable thing to do to oneself, frankly. But by the time we get to the venue, we've done our best to put all of this behind. And the good news is that the band is not 27 and looking for pharmaceutical assistance, right? Basically, excluding myself, the band is, I would say, late 30s through late 40s, something like this. And they're professional musicians. So it doesn't mean they know how to play. It means they know how to endure all the time in between the times they get to play. So that's a little of the back scenes of the thing. And the best way I've come to describe it that suits and satisfies my understanding of what we're actually doing comes to this. It's not really governed by our intention. I mean, that's what we have to bring, obviously, as well as our training and our whatever musicality we have, and sense of poetics and all the rest. But it is, and I don't think this is a hackneyed thing to say, it's a kind of partnership, but I'm not sure the audience is our partner in this. I would rather imagine that there's something of what you could call the unseen world or the other world that constitutes our strange companion in the proceedings. And it's that mingling that the audience witnesses, the mingling of us with this other world. So if that sounds a little too fairy-like, I could break it down quite easily and say, it's hit me last year sometime that what we were doing was theatrical, because you normally get the questions that go like this. So is it theater? Is it a musical? Is it funk? Is it techno? You get choices apparently, and they're all on the order of, well, it's like fish, but without the fishy taste. That's what it all seems to come down to. Like, who would want fish without the fishy taste? What would that be? And the answer is factory farm chicken. That's what that would be. But I know, although we borrow from those places and those endeavors, we're not really faithful to the contemporary understanding of musical or theater or poetry or quote spoken word or any of that kind of thing. I think it's this. I do have a historical sensibility that I bring to bear on these matters. Probably too long at school, and it's a habit that never really I'm fully rid of. And so I'm mindful that the classical Greek world gave to the West its understanding of theater, and for which we're properly, I hope, grateful. But there's some extreme limitations to that understanding of theater, which don't necessarily mean us well, because there was something that existed in the Mediterranean world and elsewhere that was before theater. It's not like, we had nothing, we were dragging our knuckles around in the dirt, and then suddenly we had theater. No, theater arose from the compromise of something else. And the something else is ritual or ceremony. So what I'm asking you to consider is that theater is the abrogation of ceremony. And this is what I mean. Theater, in our understanding of it, has two fundamental aspects. One of them is called the script, and the other one is called the audience. As far as the script goes, why is the script even there? And the answer is to determine what happens. But why would you have to determine what happens? Well, because you're not enormously trusting of what might occur minus the script. That's why. And you can already begin to hear in that the compromise of the old understanding of what ceremony was for. And I'll elaborate that in a second. And so as to audience, you could ask yourself, man, how did an audience happen? And if you're not mindful of it, you'll end up saying that an audience is inevitable. It's always been. That's not true. I'm certain that's not true. Our understanding of audience now is basically a kind of inert witness brigade, if you will, whose sole function is to add ambience to the proceedings. And then hopefully, if all has gone well, to exercise the Caesar option at the end with a thumbs up that's audible. if that's not too ungenerous in the characterization, I think it's accurate. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what is ceremony then? Why do you not have scripts at ceremonies? Because the script subverts the ceremony. That's why. Mm-hmm. The ceremony occurs in order to determine and to achieve something, not to affirm something that's already been attempted and achieved, you see, and affirmed. So it's a mystery dance, and you don't know if you've employed think ceremony. You don't know. You have a sense of the imperative that your times are troubled or your people are plagued or whatever it is that prompts, ritual behavior, ceremonial work. But for all of that, you don't have a script because you're in some kind of prolonged tangle with the gods, and there is no script for that. There's hanging on for dear life and trying to keep your wits about you, mm-hmm. and be well spoken at the time. That's what that is. And then we come to audience, and in ritual days and those places that are still engaged in real ritual today, everyone who's present is a participant and must be a participant, because the qualities that they bring, their sense of attuneness or alertness or anxiety or whatever it is, these things weigh heavily upon the ceremony, and the ceremony employs those things and engages them, as well as trying to, in some fashion or other, I suppose, assuage them. But if you back into being an audience, you're backing away from the ceremony, and basically you're, quote unquote, leaving it to the pros, you see, the 2 or 3 or 5 people, quote, down front. And so you can see from that take on things, perhaps, how a theatrical conceit kind of arose from a degradation of an understanding of what a ritual was for. And so I think what we're doing is something that defies easy description, not because it's novel or unique, but because it's so old that we tend, in North America at least, not to have a living memory of a time when things weren't theatricized, if that's a word.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to remember and enact, not reenact. Enact.
It's beautiful. I know.
I tell you this, I would love to go to one of these shows. I mean, that description alone excites me. And I think to myself, man, I'd love to go one of these things. But of course, if I go, it won't happen. So this is the choice I have to make. I have to forego being able to go to one in order that one could be there.
Yeah. It's beautiful. It's very alive.
Yeah, it is for us.
I know we both underlined this phrase in, I don't even remember where it came from, a recent interview or something you wrote perhaps about the, you say the feel good, no matter what's happening industry is in full swing right now. And I wish you would unpack that a little bit. And I know you're not inviting people to come together to feel bad, but something more honest, maybe. It just is speaking about grief. I'd love you to unpack that statement a little bit.
Okay, I'll try. First of all, as to the thing about feeling bad,
yeah,
I don't think there's anything either incomplete or inauthentic or self-indulgent or afflicted about, quote, feeling bad. This is an absolutely mandatory part of the repertoire, and it belongs, and to banish it in the name of having a good time is essentially a kind of emotional ethnic cleansing. You could call it, where you're going to wipe out all of the gnarly bits of what you've come up with and turn into some kind of circus freak of positivity. Right? Okay, so with that in mind, then, so I'm saying, of course, that feeling the bad might be a better way to say it than feeling bad.
Yeah.
In other words, feeling bad means to occupy more or less exclusively the grim end of the spectrum. But feeling the bad is to exercise the much more adult scaled capacity to bear faithful witness to the broad emotional and spiritual spectrum that's claiming, properly so, our attention today. Okay, so then the lament that you quoted there is something in the order of saying, how has it come to pass, or what has afflicted a people whereby they would write a prescription for their own relief that includes an utter unwillingness to know the fullness of the world that's been entrusted to them, and then call that a life. So the claim I'm making, or the plea that I'm making, is the understanding that a full life is not a safe place. So all this language today of safe space, I mean, I can't even say this without hacking a fur ball. Honest to God, it's such a revolting limit of kind of emotional intelligence that people let themselves in for, to imagine that they have to have a, quote, safe space in which to learn. Let me use that example. Learning by definition is caustic, expensive, iffy, and very hard on the furniture. Okay, you don't get to feel safe and learn at the same time, honey. That's that. So at least that's what I'm saying. So I don't think feeling safe is either a human need or a right RIGHT. I think it's an indulgence, and I think it requires a ferocious amount of setting aside of what's in front of you in order to feel safe. And then imagine feeling safe as a prerequisite for engaging the heavy labor that a troubled time asks of any of us, a time like this one. So that's the lament that's in the quote that you read there.
Mm-hmm.
The feel-good industry. I mean, it's not that it's not understandable. I'm not an idiot about these things, and I'm not a fascist about them, although I can flirt with fascism about it from time to time. But really what I mean is, it comes down to this. The kids are watching.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. The kids are watching, and if they see people in their 40s and 50s and 60s or older, trying to wring just a little bit more out of the world for themselves by retreating and by self-actualizing and by selfieing and all of that stuff, and demanding more satisfaction from a deeply unsatisfactory arrangement. And I could just go on with the descriptions, but I think you know what I'm saying. And the kids are watching this. They make one of two decisions. Either that's what they should be doing too, or the older you get, the more discreditable and impossible to identify with you become. And I don't intend for the Nights of Grief and Mystery to be any kind of an encouragement to young people to give up on the notion of aging and to insist that aging is nothing more than a kind of slow collapse into self-indulgence.
Oh. So we're both sitting here with tears in our eyes, and our, I'm going to cry just saying it, our 9-year-old in the back room, watching a movie while we speak with you. And I, speaking about feeling the bad, like, I'm so damn grateful for truth telling, and my heart hurts hearing what you said, and I'm grateful for it.
Yeah. That's one of Gregory's songs. He's it's a song called Shadow, which you'll hear in the show. And one of the refrains is, he says, I am grateful for it all, for every cut and every fall. And that's not heroic. It's not as if you're grateful for it. It's less of a cut and less of a fall.
Yeah.
The heartbreak that you describe, it's real. And it's one of the ways by which you know that you're alive and you're not truant from the current proceedings. If I got a 9-year-old kid in the next room, my kids are in their 30s now, but if I have a 9-year-old kid in the next room watching a movie in these days, I don't know from where I would be able to draw my sanity to make a decision about, what kind of crazy shit to have in the house. Like movies and devices and all of this, they're frankly devilish. I mean, we're beginning to realize the amount of information that the regime is gathering and selling about us, just as a consequence of what we're doing here right now. I mean, they know. And no matter what kind of surveillance paranoia we may have had during the Cold War, it's nothing on what's going on today. And the thing is, they couldn't care less about you. They're selling your kid on the devices, not you, right? That's their business plan, is to, I travel, I see children 3-4 years old sat up in economy class with the idiot maker babysitter tuned up and turned on in front of them. And those kids will watch that screen, that little baby-sized screen. They would never be able to focus on anything else. But notoriously, they can focus on that idiot screen almost indefinitely, like a transatlantic flight. And they're still looking. And I'm thinking to myself, you think that's a successful outing? That your kid is utterly entranced by the most questionable of programming, but it's not the programming. It's the thing itself. It's what Marshall McLuhan said. It's the medium that is having the greater consequence, not the content on the screen. It's the screen. Now, I don't mean this to sound paranoid. It's not paranoid. It's the beginning of understanding what we've allowed to be put into motion on our watch, you see. And I don't know how we're ever going to claim the attention span of kids in their 20s if their nursemaid was a screen.
Mm-hmm.
So then you have to be, to the extent that you're able, more and more adamantly alive. You know, by that, I don't mean hysterical. I mean that your willingness to be alive and not a surrogate for some kind of idea or symbol or better time yet to come. I mean, that's what's asked of us now. And, you know, as heartbreaking as that clearly is for you to hear it, as I try to find a way to say it, I would invite you to imagine how much heartbreak is necessary for me to inhabit the words in order to find the right order and make it legible.
Yeah.
And get it heard one more time, night after night after night.
Mm-hmm.
That's the public service that we're trying to perform, that no one's asking us to do until it's done. And then they say, you know, wonderfully complimentary things like you did. Like, to hear this has immense consequence. And it doesn't have to fit into feels good, doesn't feel good, not applicable. I mean, that's not the range.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we're doing two things at the same time with the Nights of Grief and Mystery. One is to appeal to the emotional and psychic range of adults. And the other one is to make a plea that range be extended and expanded, not narrowed down until people feel they, quote unquote, got their money's worth because they forgot about their life for a couple hours.
Yeah, I love how you described it as being the opposite of entertainment.
I hope it's something closer to the undoing of entertainment.
Mm.
Or the willingness to place entertainment in the junior position that it should take, and that replace spectacle with a willingness to see.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
Mm.
I mean, at this point, I don't know if this is helping you sell one more ticket, to be honest. I mean, I imagine people sitting there going, well, I don't know about you, Fred, but life's too short for that kind of stuff.
Mm.
You know, let me tell you a true story that I actually told the other night in the first show that we did,
Mm-hmm.
night before last. It's a true story. There was a young man who was in my school, the Orphan Wisdom School, and he was desperate to have his family at home understand why he was so drawn to what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess he tried to get them to read the books. They wouldn't do it. Listen to the interviews. They may not have done so. I don't know what it was. But then he got the idea that he would have a family screening of Grief Walker at the house. Now, he should have asked me for it, but he didn't. He just went ahead and did it. And he imagined that this is the great sync up that he's going to have with his family, right? Where they're at the end of the screening, it's all will be revealed, and the veil will be torn, and they will embrace him and me, apparently, as a surrogate, and so on. Well, here's what actually happened. So he screens the film, and the film is over, the lights come up, and nobody says a word for a long time. Very painful, I guess. And then eventually he can't bear it any longer, and he says, so what did you think? And his father looks up, and then he points at the screen where I used to be, and he says, does that guy ever go bowling? And that was it. Does he ever go bowling?
Hmm.
Well, you know what he was saying. He was saying, too serious.
Mm-hmm.
Got to lighten up. Not good for you as a 20-something-year-old to be anywhere near this kind of stuff. It's kind of weapons grade seriousness, you know. And all that means is, I mean, people are shocked when they come to me afterwards, you know, when we're signing books at the end of the show, and they say, I never knew you're that funny. Well, where do you think the sorrow comes from?
Mm-hmm.
Because our circumstance is beyond the narrow definitions of happy or sad. It's much closer to tragic and comic. That's where we are now. And if you are practicing in one of those, it's because you have more than a passing familiarity with the other. Yeah, there's a lot of hilarity in Nights of Grief and Mystery, but it's not a break from the action any more than the songs are a break from the stories. The capacity to laugh is not running away from something. Laughing is amongst the most generous and recognizing things a human being can do. You laugh nervously when you don't see, but you laugh from the belly when you do.
This is our second time getting to talk to you, and I have a sense of how funny you are. I have no doubt about that. So I want to ask a question about a word that you've used a few times in this conversation, which is about being faithful.
Yeah. What would you like to ask about it?
What do you mean? Faithful to what?
Well, I'm not even sure I should use the word, largely because there's a sector of the population that believes it owns the word and the meaning and the function and so on, right? But I could redefine faith and talk myself out of the use of the word in this way. We have a number of patron saints of the Orphan Wisdom School, and one of them is the character known to history as Doubting Thomas. I love this guy, Doubting Thomas. He's my idea of a proper good time. And he's got a bad rap in the belief industry and the faith industry, largely on the strength of the misrepresentation of his action. And as you may or may not know, the very briefly, the Bible story says that, and here's Jesus resurrected in the tomb, and at least everybody thinks it's him. At least 10 of them do. And so they just take a knee, right? And everybody's hallelujah and all that kind of thing. And here's this one character, Tom, if you will. And what does Tom do? He says, basically, to paraphrase it, not very elegantly, he said, look, I know you're all sure this is the guy. And there's nothing in me that wants that to be true deeper. But there's something about the wound that I have to learn in order to know if it's him. And you're willing to take it on faith, but I'm going to have to put my fingers in his wounds to come to the same understanding that you've come with no such gesture. That's the guy I love, that guy right there. Because there's something about his willingness to love the one that he had lost that risked it all on the distinct possibility that that's not him at all, and that this man is well and truly lost. So rather than seeing him as someone who doubts, you could simply see him as someone who loves. And the other guys weren't willing to love like that, and so they went to faith instead. And that's my way of saying is faith is what you have when you've decided that love is not all it's cracked up to be. See? So with that in mind, I would say then, what we're trying to do in the Nights of Grief and Mystery is enact a kind of uncommon understanding of love, which is willing to settle in alongside everything that would threaten to undo it. You see? So, for example, about 2/3 of the way through the show, I use the expression love letter, and I characterize what's coming next in the show as a love letter. And it's amongst the most heartbreaking stories I've ever seen or heard or told in my life. And how can you call something that is heartbreaking a love letter? But as soon as I say it that way, I know you're thinking, of course, these things belong together. And if there's no heartbreak in a love letter, if there's no, like the tinge of we're so far away from each other, or there's a possibility of us misunderstanding even the most faithful, if you will, declarations of love, or Or with all of that, the whole thing is so time limited, you know, there's nothing eternal about it, no matter what the guy in the pulpit says. It's not. That's not our place, eternity. This is our place, clearly. And, you know, we're hanking after an eternity, but we're blowing mortality. I mean, what does anybody imagine we're going to do with immortality if we get there? Given our track record with mortality, it's something like, if we ever get to Mars, it'll be the worst suburb imaginable.
Oh,
Based on that, you know, analogy, right? So anyway, what am I trying to find or braille our way towards, I guess? And the answer is to be a deeply claimed person in a time that would seduce you towards autonomy and sedation. So if I use the word that you use, that's what we're trying to be faithful to. The necessity of waking up.
Could you speak more about becoming a deeply claimed person?
I have. I have for the last however long we've been speaking.
yeah.
You know, there's one thing to talk about something as a subject, a discrete subject, and it's another thing to speak in the presence of the something without always talking about it. And that's what you're hearing me doing here. I nominally am talking about the Grief and Mystery show, but mostly I'm talking from the same stance of urgency in speaking to you now that I do from the stage.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the through line, and that's what I mean by being claimed. You know, I wrote this book, Come of Age, a couple of years ago, and somewhere in there, I float out the possibility that generations are generations, not because, you know, they all listen to the same music or wear the same clothes or the same recreational drugs or whatever it is, that a generation is a generation because its time creates of it a generation. And how does it do so? Because its time makes certain claims upon a given group of people who all grow up, you know, close to the same age. They're within 15 years either side of the same age. And those claims, that generation will either undertake kind of the spirit work that goes with the troubles and the travails of its time, or it will be truant to that work. Either way, it will be defined as a generation. Preferably what you'd want is to participate in a generation that more or less willingly took up the spirit work that the world was asking of it at a given time. If that's true, then it means that the actual work is not transferable from one generation to the next, you see. In the same way that I've tried to make the case over the years that wisdom is not inheritable. Because it's the nature of wisdom to be specific and local and tied to its times, you see. That's where the wisdom arises, from the particulars of the time you're born to and what it asks of you. But can you inherit the willingness of prior generations to be claimed by their time? The answer is yes. You can be claimed by their example. And then you must take that example and emulate it by recognizing what your times are asking of you. See? And a sequence of those willingnesses over time, that's what a culture is. And you could offset that by saying what a civilization is an attempt to make a distance from what preceded you so that you're free to self-declare and self-actualize and quote, make your own way, which is in spite of the world, what it asks of you, not because of it. And so we're a deeply civilized people now with no culture to help us. You could say the Nights of Grief and Mystery then are an attempt to acculturate. really. I mean, that's not overstating what we're trying to get to in 2.5 hours.
I was just going to say, I'm thinking about something you were saying. I think it's at the beginning of the Lost Nation Road short film, speaks about the two-headed hydra.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And you're speaking about the death trade, but also, of course, how apt a description it is about our culture. And, you know, I can say what I remember of that, but I would love you to speak a little bit about it. Well, I'll just say briefly what I remember about this willingness to do anything to keep it going.
Mm-hmm.
And we could talk about, you know, our current lifestyle, maybe not culture, but as well as a human life in the death trade. And then the willingness of people to go along with that.
Yeah.
And that seems like such an apt description of where we are. And like, you know, I'm coming back to what you said about squeezing more satisfaction out for ourselves, you know, or something like that. And what a different invitation you're making in everything you're talking about today.
Uh-huh. Well, it's kind of you to imagine that I'm making an invitation, but I think the ink on the invitation is more drastic than quote invitation suggests.
Yeah.
You know, obviously I'm making something closer to a plea bordering on a demand.
Okay. Yeah.
Than it is an invitation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's a difference in kind there.
Mm-hmm.
But as to the two-headed hydra, well, you've made a very good point that didn't occur to me when I said it. Mm-hmm. But as I listen to you now, I realize, yeah, that is applicable beyond the level of sort of the resources, material resources available in end-of-life care that prolong the end of life, which is what I was referring to. Then the willingness of patients and their families to have that prolonged in the name of, quote unquote, getting more time and that sort of thing.
Right.
That's what I was referring to. But your point is better than mine, which is the realization that that's, in a way, a small little effigy of a much broader cultural malaise or poverty, which is to continue to wring from a dying way of life something like satisfaction,
mm-hmm.
Which your country calls the American dream, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Which apparently, quote, everybody's entitled to, which is one of the most pernicious declarations you could possibly make. Because that dream is what, you know, what has clearly begun to kill the continent and beyond. Of course it has. And to continue every election cycle to revive that notion that it's the entitlement of everyone to be sedated into self-satisfaction and to run on such a platform to try to get elected and then promptly, you know, milk the system for everything it's worth in the next 3.5 years. I mean, it just makes you want to shake your head, you know, unless you awaken to something beyond bitterness about that, which is this. You could say politics, it's all scummy and dark, and it's hard to disagree. But why would you go to the political arena for some kind of deep and abiding existential and philosophical truth making and telling and bearing witness to? Why would you do that? I mean, it's foolishness to go there. It's akin to going to the hardware store and demanding pumpernickel. And then blaming the guy behind the counter who's sitting there with screwdrivers why he doesn't have the rye bread that you want.
Mm-hmm.
Who's the fool? Okay, so, you know, I'm blaming the politicians only to the extent that they're being faithfully political.
Mm-hmm.
And that they don't realize, not unlike the palliative care doctors who are engaged in this kind of continuance at all costs, that when you cease being a politician and you cease being a palliative care physician, you will be a human being like the rest of us, my friend. And what it means is, on your watch, what you failed to change will come to claim you and the people you claim to love. And that's your, what's the word they use? That's your not reputation. That's your, sorry, I can't think of the word now. The thing you leave behind.
The legacy.
That's right. That's your legacy, that what you failed to change come to get you anyway. You see, you can tell by what I'm telling you that at this point in my life, like 65-year-olds are not supposed to get a rock and roll band and go out on the road, apparently. Never mind employ a kind of format like I've described to you to make the concerted plea and demand for a better day. Like, you're supposed to be cooling out and leave this to the kids or to the pros, but I did. And they didn't do it. So it's my turn.
Yeah.
That's it. I am a bit of a conversation killer, right?
I wouldn't say that.
You're a pause inducer.
Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty good. That's benign. A pause inducer. That's true. Yeah.
I just want to go back to that image because I find it so evocative, both about the death trade and about our current times, about a hydra. And a hydra is the monster, right? Where when you cut off its head, more grow back, right?
Right. Uh-huh.
So, what do we do about a hydra like that?
Well, this is an apt description of a consumer culture.
Right.
A consumer culture, by definition, absorbs what comes to challenge it.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't defeat or wage direct war upon what challenges it. It absorbs it instead. So the good example would be blue jeans.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, during the period of the Second World War or so, blue jeans were poor people's apparel, and nobody who could afford otherwise would ever have worn them.
Mm-hmm.
They were factory-related things and agriculture-related things, right? And within a generation, they became, quote, symbolic of a more authentic kind of non-Eisenhower way of life, if you will. And in so doing, immediately emptied of their authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
And now you go about the city. I just came back from the city late last night,
Mm-hmm.
and you see these people at some considerable expense to themselves buying pants, denim pants that are, quote, distressed, unquote. And there's more holes in them than there is fabric.
Mm-hmm.
And never mind the questionable aesthetic of the whole thing, but the symbolism is so tawdry. I mean, it's so nakedly transparent that you're trying to buy with this distressed clothing a life that appears worn, minus any of the distress, minus any of the work. And this is how a consumer culture operates. It gives you the choice to look like you're a working person, but not have to go through the drudgery of actually being one.
Right.
And that's what I mean by the Hydra image. And so your question is, what do you do about it? Look, first of all, I have no idea. But that doesn't trouble me that I don't know how to fix everything.
Right.
Because my preference for the brief allotment that's left to me is to see if I can exercise whatever capacities of the mind and elsewhere that I have to draw close to the dilemmas as they stand,
Mm-hmm.
without feeling like I have an obligation to banish all those dilemmas in the act of considering them, to defeat everything in one fell swoop by having, quote, the magic bullet.
Mm-hmm.
Even the notion of a magic bullet is a consumer culture solution.
Mm-hmm.
You see, the notion that you have to feel positively inclined and hopeful about a better day in order to undertake the labor of creating a better day. Could it not be the case that people of your age and mine, our obligation is to undertake the work without any promise? That we will never see the consequences of our little actions against the regime. We won't see them. And we can't hold out to want to be both the benefactor and the beneficiary at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
That's just bad faith, you know. It's indefensibly self-indulgent, right? And like I say, the kids are watching. So you're going to have to, and I'm going to have to act on behalf of something that we will not live to see. That's it. That's our end of things.
Yeah.
And you could say it's all self-effacing. Well, bullshit. It's not self-effacing at all. I mean, if you've lived as long as me, you've been on the receiving end of a fairly ample deal in North America.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying everybody's life has been great. I am saying, though, that at least the material aspects of the life available to the majority of people in North America is not something to throw under the bus the moment you have some belligerence or some grudge match with the current circumstance of your life. I mean, at some point, you got to realize your capacity to act on behalf of a better day is largely to be derived from the extraordinary degree of opportunity and privilege that was accorded to you during the course of your life. That's it, man. So, you know, and I know that the word privilege is a dark friggin' word these days. If you're called privilege, like you're supposed to be collapse in shame and self-hatred and all that stuff. And while I understand where the notion's coming from, I don't go along with the prescription. And I would say this, and I think this is an idea I first heard from a countryman of mine named Jordan Peterson, who made the claim that if we are indeed privileged, and it's hard to argue, we are clearly privileged in terms of the world's various populations. We are. Mm-hmm. So what do you do? Do you try to wash your hands Pontius Pilate style and try not to be privileged while you are? That might be the most heinous act of privilege yet, right? To try to not be privileged while you are. And that's your kids going to somebody else's, cultural patrimony for the sake of having something meaningful spiritually in their lives. That's what that is. So could we say this instead, that the real responsibility of being born into privilege, which is just an accident, it doesn't say anything about how worthy you and I were to have been born where we are.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But retroactively, we might have to live in a worthy way to establish something like why it happened the way it did. If we were born to an experience of privilege, then retroactively we have to earn the privilege we were born to.
Mm.
That's what I would say about it. And there's no prescription for how to do that. You have to work like the Dickens to try to figure out what it looks like. But that notion of working without benefit of the payday, but just the work, that might be one way today we might earn the privilege that we were born to, and leave that as an example to the 9-year-olds watching the movies in the other room while we're talking.
Yes. It's beautiful. And that comes back to faithfulness and being claimed, to really live into that.
You could say that this is the mark of being a citizen. That's the word I would probably use as a synonym for being claimed by your time. It's the fundamental act of citizenship is to occupy fully, not just the upside of what you were born to, but the extraordinary kind of checklist of costliness that your way of life has inflicted on the world through no direct fault of your own. I mean, you didn't engineer it, but you are the beneficiary of it. And to that extent, you're implicated by it. And I'm implicated by it. And the Nights of Grief and Mystery is one act that 5 of us are engaged in to try to see if we can retroactively earn the good fortune that we were born to.
Well, thank you so much, Stephen. It was such a delight to talk with you again. And we're excited to have you and the band come to write a love letter to our city.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are too. I've never been to your city. I've never been to your state either. So it'll be a first in many ways. And if I could, and this is a bit shameless for me to do this, but it's but it's dignified though. I'm a Canadian, and feel very lucky to have been born on this side of the border. There's no doubt of it.
Mm-hmm.
But with all of that, we remain a very much a kind of colonized place, that we are forever nervous about our own and the merits of anything that we produce. And we are just always the second one to say yes to what we ourselves come up with in this country. And, your country has benefited enormously from the inability of talented people in Canada to make any kind of living here. They have to come to the States. And of course, if the American audience loves them, suddenly the Canadians start claiming them. And it's just embarrassing, and it's shameful. But I can tell you, every time we cross the border without fail, I'm not saying the Americans always love what we're doing. I will say this, though. When an American audience likes you, you're not up on the stage wondering if they like you. And there's something generous about that. I don't know how you manage that kind of generosity, given all the other stuff you have to deal with politically and the rest, but it's still there. And it's still a kind of thrill that we outsiders quietly look forward to and secretly imagine could happen again.
Oh, we can't wait. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yay. Yeah, well, it's so wonderful. Just, the first time we interviewed you and talked with you at the end, you were saying, invite me to come to Salt Lake City. And you are coming. So maybe I just want to say, I hope you come again.
Well, let's get one under our belt first and make sure we don't embarrass you too badly. And then we'll go to some other possibilities. But look, all that's a testimony to what? Do we need hundreds of thousands of dollars in beer sponsors and what do we need to pull off something that's frankly subversive like this? And the answer is, we need a few people on the ground to say yes, and we need a few people who know how to do this to say, let's go. And we don't need massive infrastructure. We don't need to be underwritten by something or this or that. We don't need to compromise with the regulatory bodies. And we can in good faith say, yes, it's a concert, and it is. And we can in good faith say, and we're trying to see to it that something of the old order is deeply in disarray on the other end of what we try to do. And between those two things, we extract a little bit of pride that we were lucky enough to be in on such chicanery.
Wonderful.
So I'm glad you said yes, and we're glad we took you up on the offer, and let's go have ourselves a time.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you too.
See you soon.
See you soon. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you enjoy this podcast, it's great if you want to share it with friends or post about it on social media. Also, you could make a donation to support the podcast or find out more information about our classes and offerings at our website, embodimentmatters.com.